and welcome to Indus News Live from Islamabad. I'm Hira Mustafa and these are the headlines. The Afghan government has confirmed its participation in two separate US and Russian-backed peace conferences. The Russian-backed conference is scheduled for this Thursday in Moscow, while the US-sponsored talks will take place in Turkey next month. The two meetings are aimed at supporting talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government as violence continues to rage in the war-torn country. In Myanmar, at least 6 more anti-coup protesters have been killed by security forces in Yangon, Mandalay and PA. It comes as activists are marking the death anniversary of a student whose killing in 1988 sparked an uprising against the then military government. Meanwhile, the US, India, Australia and Japan vowed to work together to restore democracy in Myanmar. In Sri Lanka, the Minister for Public Security says the country will ban the wearings of burqa and shut over 1,000 madrasa on national security grounds. Sarath Weerasakera told a news conference that he has sent the summary for cabinet approval. The wearing of burqa was temporarily banned in 2019 after more than 250 people were killed in a series of bombings on churches and hotels. This ban was lifted earlier this year after criticism from the US and international rights groups. India has reported this year's biggest spike in single-day COVID-19 infections, where nearly 25,000 tested positive overnight. India's caseload has exceeded 11.3 million, while its death toll has surged over 158,000. Meanwhile, Pakistan has recorded over 2,300 new cases and 46 deaths overnight, taking the toll to over 13,400. The global tally of coronavirus infections has topped 119 million, with 2.6 million deaths. And in tennis, Spain's Roberto Bautista Agut has cruised into the final of the Qatar Open after beating third-seeded Russian Andrei Rublev in the semi-final. The fifth-seeded beat the defending champion 6-3, 6-3 and will now face Georgia's Nicolas Basilashvili in today's final. Well, these were the headlines. News in detail coming after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now the news in detail. The Afghan government has confirmed its participation in two separate US and Russian-backed peace conferences. The Russian-backed conference is scheduled for this Thursday in Moscow, while US-sponsored talks will take place in Turkey next month. Moscow has also invited several regional players, including Taliban representatives. It said the Taliban must be part of any interim setup in Afghanistan. A US draft peace plan has also called for an inclusive Afghan government until a new constitution is agreed. The two conferences are aimed at supporting talks between the Taliban and Kabul as violence continues to rage in the war-torn country. In the last 24 hours, at least 27 people have been killed in separate incidents of violence across Afghanistan. At least 6 more anti-coup protesters have been killed by security forces in Myanmar. Several others were injured in clashes with police across the country. Police opened fire on a sit-in protest in Mandalay, killing 2 people and injuring several others. 2 died in police firing in the commercial capital of Yangon, while another person was killed in the central town of PA. It comes as activists are marking the death anniversary of a student whose killing in 1988 sparked an uprising against the then military government. Meanwhile, the US, India, Australia and Japan vowed to work together to restore democracy in Myanmar. The UN says more than 70 people have been killed and over 2,000 detained in Myanmar protests since the February 1st coup. Sri Lanka says it will ban the wearing of veil and shut more than 1,000 Islamic schools on what it said national security grounds. In a news conference, Minister for Public Security Sarath Weerasakera said this proposal has been sent for cabinet approval. The minister called the veil a sign of extremism and alleging the schools have been flouting national educational policy. The latest move follows a last year's order of mandating cremation of COVID-19 victims that opposed the burial practice of Muslims. This ban was lifted earlier this year after criticism from the United States and international rights groups. In 2019, the country temporarily banned the veil. In the U.S. capital of Washington, a large number of Sikh community members has protested against the Indian government's treatment of farmers. Protesters gathered near the White House. They were holding placards that read, "India is a terrorist state" and "Stop Indian terrorism." The farmers' protests in India have gained international recognition after their agitation turned violent. More than 250 farmers have died in the protest that started 4 months ago at Delhi borders. But the farmers vow to intensify the agitation and say they will not budge until the center withdraws the 3 laws completely. The U.S. says it is communicating with Iran on the revival of 2015 nuclear deal through indirect diplomacy. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan revealed this at a press briefing. Sullivan said Washington has engaged European states to convey messages about vis-a-vis stances on the deal compliance. He said despite difficulties, the U.S. believes that it can prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon through the diplomatic process. Sullivan added currently Washington is waiting to hear further from Tehran over how it would like to proceed. Last month, the U.S. indicated readiness to talk to Iran, seeking to revive the nuclear deal that Washington abandoned in 2018. Russia has accused the United States of using IT opportunities to engage in unfair competition in all affairs. Moscow says Washington is using social media platforms arbitrarily and indiscriminately censoring content. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said the social media platforms do not have unified standards for managing themselves. In a post on Facebook, Zakharova termed this a semantic and technological stalemate. She slammed the platforms as censoring digital content randomly without a decision of a competent authority. Earlier, Russia said it was slowing down Twitter over what it described as a failure to remove banned content. At least 6 people, including a Palestinian minister, have been injured after Israeli army clashed with protesters in the occupied West Bank. Palestinian activists say Minister Nasri Abu Jaish was injured by a stun grenade and was also battered by a soldier's weapon. Palestinian media says dozens of protesters were affected by the tear gas. Palestinians were protesting against illegal Jewish settlements in the West Bank and the wall of separation. Yesterday, Israeli troops detained 5 Palestinian minors and obstructed many from entering Al-Aqsa Mosque. Ethiopia has rejected U.S. allegations of ethnic cleansing during conflict in the restive Tigray region. In a statement, the Foreign Ministry accused Washington of overblowing things out of proportion. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has earlier said there are credible reports of human rights abuses in western Tigray. The conflict began last year when the government launched an offensive against local rebels following an attack on military facilities. Thousands of people were reportedly killed and an estimated 100,000 people displaced during the conflict. The UN Security Council has called for the withdrawal of foreign troops and mercenaries from Libya without any delay. In a unanimously approved statement, the Council welcomed the Libyan Parliament's approval of a new unified government. The statement called on all parties to implement the ceasefire agreement in full. The Council said it recognizes the need to plan for the disarmament and to establish a civilian-led security architecture for Libya. The ceasefire agreement was reached in October last year, calling for the withdrawal of all foreign forces from Libya in 3 months. According to the global body, around 20,000 foreign troops and mercenaries remained in Libya at the end of 2020, but no withdrawals have been observed since. In Algeria, thousands took to the streets of the capital Algiers against president's announcement of early legislative elections. The protesters are demanding a complete overhaul of the ruling elite, an end to corruption, and the army's withdrawal from politics. Protesters say they will refuse to vote in the upcoming polls held under a political elite they reject. The vote is part of reforms promised by President Abdelmadjid Tebboune following protests that forced his predecessor to resign in 2019. Tebboune dissolved Algeria's parliament last month and has now set June 12 for early elections. New Zealand members, the victims of Christchurch mosque shooting ahead of the second anniversary of the terrorist attack. A gunman opened fire on Muslim worshippers and killed 51 people in the March 15 shooting.
A remembrance service was held at the Christchurch Arena, where the family members of the victims spoke about the tragedy. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern also attended the memorial. At the service, the names of the victims were read aloud, while their pictures were displayed on a large screen. A minute of silence was also observed for the victims. Community members delivered prayers during the memorial, while Ardern spoke about how words have the power to heal.
We all own and hold the power of words. We use them, we hear them, we respond to them. How we choose to use this most powerful of tools is our choice. There will be an unquestionable legacy from March 15. Much of it will be heartbreaking, but it is never too early or too late for the legacy to be a more inclusive nation.
New Zealand's worst peacetime killing shook the country to its core and prompted the government to quickly tighten gun laws.
The global tally of coronavirus infections has topped 119 million with 2.6 million deaths. The World Health Organization has granted emergency authorization to Johnson & Johnson's one-shot COVID-19 vaccine. More on the pandemic in this report.
The world hoped for a better and happier 2021, but with the political controversies, socio-economic impact, mutating variants, and now the questions on vaccines' efficacy are dampening the confidence. In the US, President Joe Biden is set to promote his $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan next week by hitting the road on Help is Here tour. The US has also become the only country to top the 100 million COVID-19 vaccines administrations since the first shot on 14th of December last year. Meanwhile, the White House says the US has turned down a number of requests from around the world for COVID-19 vaccines. However, over in the south, the situation is much grimmer. Brazil has reported over 2,200 daily fatalities for the third day in a row, with the toll crossing 275,000. The country is in the tight grip of crisis as a deadly wave takes hold, pushing hospitals and intensive care units towards a collapse. The World Health Organization has warned that the state of the pandemic in Brazil is deeply concerning and serious action needs to be taken.
Brazil neighbors many countries in Latin America, almost all of them except a couple. And some countries are doing better in the neighborhood. But if the situation in Brazil continues to be serious like this, then the neighboring countries will be affected.
4 Spanish regions have stopped administering AstraZeneca's doses following reports of the formation of blood clots. Austria earlier stopped using AstraZeneca shots while it investigated death from clotting and a case of pulmonary embolism. However, AstraZeneca has insisted that its vaccine is safe. It says analyses of safety data of more than 10 million records show no evidence of an increased risk of said diseases. The European Union is also now investigating whether any of the 3 COVID-19 vaccines approved in the bloc might be linked to blood clotting. Meanwhile, Italy has announced another nationwide lockdown, while the Prime Minister thanked citizens for their infinite patience.
Qualche giorno fa A few days ago, I thanked the Italians for their infinite patience. I am aware that today's measures will have consequences for the education of children, for the economy, and also for the psychological state of all of us. However, these measures are necessary to avoid a deterioration that would make even more stringent measures inevitable.
Australia recorded the first local case in more than 2 weeks after a doctor tested positive, triggering restrictions in area hospitals. Meanwhile, South Korea has also reported a 3-week high of 490 new cases as authorities prepare for a broad vaccine rollout.
Pakistan has reported another 46 deaths from coronavirus overnight. The health ministry says the nationwide death toll has reached 13,476. The ministry registered over 2,300 new cases in the past 24 hours. It said the infection tally has crossed 602,000, of which more than 569,000 have recovered. The ministry said the number of active cases in the country is over 19,700. Meanwhile, Planning and Development Minister Asad Umar says the fast spread of the UK strain is driving the third wave in Pakistan. The government has recently reimposed restrictions and appealed to the masses to strictly adhere to COVID-19 SOPs. In Jordan, 8 patients have died in the capital Amman due to a shortage of oxygen supplies. State media says several other patients are in critical condition. It said the health minister has resigned following the death of the patients. In a statement, Jordanian Prime Minister Bishr al-Khaswane said he has ordered an immediate investigation into the incident. He said those responsible for the incident will be held accountable. The US, Australia, India and Japan have committed to supplying up to 1 billion coronavirus vaccine doses across Asia by the end of 2022. This comes as US President Joe Biden hosted first meeting of Quad at leader level. Biden said a free and open Indo-Pacific is essential to each of the 4 countries. Meanwhile, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison called the meeting New Dawn in the Indo-Pacific. In a joint statement, Quad said they strive for a region that is inclusive, healthy, anchored by democratic values. The Quad countries also formed a working group to tackle climate issues, including strengthening implementation of the Paris Climate Accord. They have also formed another working group for critical and emerging technology. And now it's time to take a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Anti-Asian hate crimes have surged 149% in 16 of America's largest cities between 2019 and 2020. The Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University's analysis shows the overall hate crime dropped 7% in 2020. According to another report, the U.S. saw 2,800 anti-Asian hate incidents linked to COVID-19 prejudice last year. Experts say the racist language used by former President Donald Trump empowered extremists to come out overtly to attack Asians. However, President Joe Biden has called for an end to this practice, terming it un-American. Biden said Asian Americans are on the front line of this pandemic trying to save lives, but still are forced to live in fear. The U.S. city of Minneapolis has reached a $27 million settlement with the family of George Floyd. The move seeks to settle a lawsuit by Floyd's family over his custodial debt that stirred worldwide protests against racial injustice. The Minneapolis City Council voted unanimously to approve the pre-trial settlement. Floyd family's attorney Benjamin Crump said the agreement is the largest pretrial settlement of a lawsuit in U.S. history. At a news conference, Crump said it signifies that unjust taking of a black life will no longer be written off as unworthy of consequences.
George Floyd's life matters, and by extension, black lives matter. It sends a message that the unjust taking of black life will no longer be written off as trivial, unimportant, or unworthy of consequences.
Now moving on, Cuba has called for the protection of human rights through constructive dialogue at the 46th session of the UN Human Rights Council. On behalf of 64 countries, Cuba made its statement in support of China's position on Xinjiang-related matters. Cuba's envoy said all sides firmly oppose the politicization of human rights and double standards. The envoy urged the relevant sides to stop interfering in China's internal affairs by manipulating Xinjiang-related issues. The representative added countries must refrain from making unfounded allegations against China after political motivations. China's foreign ministry said Xinjiang-related issues are not human rights issues at all. The spokesperson urged the countries to abandon ideological prejudice and stop undermining China's interest by using Xinjiang as a pretext. Cuba has accused the U.S. of stoking illegal migration by not processing visas in Havana, making it easier for Cubans to claim asylum. This comes after Cuban's vessel last week capsized near the Bahamas, leaving some people floating in the water for over 14 hours. The Cuban Foreign Ministry said Bahamas Defense Force ship rescued 12 people and recovered one body, but it said several people, including women and 2 children, are still missing. In a statement, the ministry said the suspension of granting visas constituted incentives for irregular migration. Responding, U.S. State Department said it has designated embassy in Guyana to process immigrant visas for residents of Cuba. The department said the U.S. is committed to supporting safe, orderly, and human migration from Cuba. Torrential rains in Peru have left thousands of people displaced and caused a path of destruction. Across much of the north, Peruvians struggle with flooded fields, dead livestock, and cut-off roads as river overflowed. In Bagua, firefighters have rescued an old woman trapped in her house after heavy rain collapses one of the walls, blocking her exit. Neighbors called authorities after hearing her yell for help. Authorities warn heavy rains are likely to cause more flooding in the regions of Lambac, Cajamarca, Piura, Tumbes, Junin, and Huánuco. China has launched its 4th group of AFGHAN 31 remote sensing satellites. A Long March 4C rocket carried the group into space from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center in northwest China. According to the launch center, it is a 363rd flight mission of the Long March carrier rocket series. The satellites will be used for electromagnetic environment surveys and other related technology tests. Beijing launched the first group of the AFGHAN 31 remote sensing satellites back in 2018. In Thailand, people celebrate Elephant Day, holding a fruit banquet for dozens of animals in the Asian capital, Ayutthaya. Festival was held with hopes that COVID-19 travel restrictions would ease soon and foreign visitors will return to revive the tourism industry. The tourism-reliant country has yet to lift a travel ban imposed last April to curb the outbreak. Elephants have been a source of national pride and cultural identity for Thailand throughout its history. They have been used for labor, transport, and in battlefield triumphs by warriors and kings. But animal rights groups have long been calling for the elephant camps in Thailand to end animal shows and rides. The first global study on human twinning suggests that more and more twins are being born now. However, researchers behind the study say that the world may now have reached peak twin. More in this report.
More doppelgangers might be roaming around the world now than ever before. According to a study published in the journal Human Reproduction, the global twinning rate has risen by a third since the 1980s, with about 1.6 million twins born each year worldwide. The findings suggest that 12 per 1,000 deliveries are now twins as compared to 9 per 1,000 around 30 years ago. Researchers have attributed medically assisted reproduction techniques like IVF as the primary cause of the increased rate.
We're seeing levels of twin births that we haven't seen before if we look at the whole world together. And that's mainly because the twinning rate in rich developed countries has gone up in the last 2, 3, 4 decades, basically since the introduction of IVF treatment, some other medically assisted reproduction, and the postponement of births, women giving birth at older ages, which in itself, independent of IVF, also increases the twinning rate.
Scientists behind the research say that high-income regions such as Europe and North America are now emphasizing on refining fertility treatments. These recent advances in assisted reproductive techniques have decreased the likelihood of twinning, particularly in these regions.
We think we're actually at the peak, or that we might be at the peak, because this increase that we've seen driven by IVF, that has come to a standstill, and in some cases actually has already declined a little bit, because the treatment is more effective, it's more successful now than it used to be.
During the study, scientists collected data on twinning rates from 165 countries between the years 2010 and 2015, and from 112 countries for the years 1980 to 1985.
The UK says it moves to ease post-Brexit trade checks on some food products with Northern Ireland are lawful and right. The moves have angered the European Union and further sewer the ties between Brussels and London. Prime Minister Boris Johnson mounted a defense of Britain's unilateral move during a trip to Northern Ireland. Johnson said the UK wants to ensure that the Northern Ireland Protocol upholds the wishes of both communities. He reiterated that the measures are right in view of the impact on the peace process and Good Friday Agreement. Now it's time to have a look at the weather update across the globe. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.